Each technological leap brings a new set of costs and consequences alongside the gains. At The Evolving Leader, we're interested in how we can benefit from the huge potential of these advances, but without losing what makes us human. AI, in particular, represents a new urgency to this question. What are humans for in an automating world? One powerful countermove out of reactivity is how we can liberate the vast interior resources that each of us has that are far more complex and capable than any computer system. Our sense-making, reasoning, creativity, empathy, and human connection. Our competitiveness as individuals, and possibly as a race, depends on our ability to amplify what only humans can do. In this show, we talk to Dacher Kelter, who directs the Berkeley Social Interaction Lab. His pioneering research focuses on the cultural and evolutionary origins of compassion, awe, love, beauty, power, social class, and social inequality. We focus into the nature of awe, what it brings to our leadership, and how to make it an everyday experience. Tune into an important and fascinating conversation on The Evolving Leader.
Hi folks, welcome to The Evolving Leader, the show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, and more human leadership to confront the world's biggest challenges. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
I usually do a feelings check-in with you here, John, but I want to narrow it down today. And I'm going to ask you, when is the last time you felt real awe?
It's a great question. And honestly, too few times. I think I noticed becoming somewhat, not indifferent, it's not the right word, but sort of not surprised at things that I'd gone to see for the first time, because I think television and films and so on place in your mind a familiarity. And so I remember going to, Grand Canyon, and the Niagara Falls recently and so on, and thinking almost my expectation of those things was blunting the experience of truly being there. And then combined with that, that horrible thing where you're looking behind a camera lens rather than actually being present. So the last time I actually felt true awe was on our forest bathing exercise that we did as a company a few weeks ago, which was a lot more mundane, but actually profoundly more awesome. So, literally hugging trees to understand what it felt like to be in contact with them. And that sounds really strange, but it was amazing. And I think all of us came away thinking, oh my God, what are we missing here? It's just, it was pretty amazing.
I love it.
So how about you?
I resonate with everything you just said about experiences feeling blunted sometimes. I will say a couple months ago, had the pleasure of sailing around Greece for a while. And so there were moments on the boat where the gentle breeze and all you could sort of hear was the wind and the waves, and, getting in the water and snorkeling and, seeing all the way to the bottom of the floor in that clear water. I'm from Southern California, so you get in the ocean, you can't see your own navel, but in that water, you're like down. So I was just in awe many times, and the stress level and came way down, and my sense of clarity came up, and I just felt so much peace and gratitude and all of those things. So so really, really grateful. And obviously there's a reason why we're talking about awe, and that's because today we're joined by Dr. Dacher Kelter. Dr. Keltner is one of the world's foremost emotion scientists. He's a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and the director of the Greater Good Science Center. He has over 200 scientific publications and 6 books, including Born to Be Good, The Compassionate Instinct, and The Power Paradox. He has written for many popular outlets, from the New York Times to Slate. He is also the scientific advisor behind Pixar's Inside Out. He's involved with the education of healthcare providers and judges and has consulted extensively for Google, Apple, and Pinterest on issues related to emotion and well-being. And in addition to us getting to know our wonderful guest today and get a better sense of his body of work, we are particularly interested in talking about his most recent book, Awe, the new science of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life. In his book, Dr. Keltner investigates the elusive emotion of awe and presents incredible research on how the emotion of awe can transform our brains and bodies and how we can cultivate more experiences of awe in our everyday lives so we're not reliant on traveling to Greece. Dr. Keltner, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
It's good to be with you guys, Scott and John.
Welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling a little bit tired. It's 7:30 in the morning, although I'm always up early because it's really the first week of the semester here at Berkeley, and we have 35,000 undergrads and 10,000 PhD students, and it's a dense place, and so I'm looking forward to the weekend just to quiet down a little.
Excellent. Well, can we start to get to know you a little bit? Where you grew up, what experiences compelled you towards this life of being a psychologist professor and then writing 6 incredible books?
Yeah, thank you. I'm at that age when, you start to think about the story of your life, and a lot of our research on awe stories figure prominently. So I've been thinking about it. And in many ways, I was born to be an emotion scientist and to study awe. My parents are, counterculture. I grew up in the late 60s in Laurel Canyon, which I see Scott's music behind him. Had a lot of rock and roll going on and revolution and politics and drugs. And I was a little 8 and 9-year-old skateboarding around. And then we moved to the country on the Sierras, where a poor rural town, kind of the hippie experiment of going to nature. And that was really instrumental in my life. Just, hours outside wandering foothills and swimming in streams and the like. And then importantly, my mom taught literature and romanticism and, Virginia Woolf and William Blake and others. And so I early on heard about awe through literature. And then my dad was a visual artist and loved Goya and Francis Bacon, a great British painter. And just so I was just in the arts, but I wasn't good at art. And I wish I was a better fiction writer, but I wasn't really good at that, but I was good at math and science. And so when I heard about Paul Ekman, that you could measure facial muscle movements and emotion in the face, I was blown off the map. Yeah, I was just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. There's a science and a mathematics of how we feel emotion, how we see emotion, what it does to our minds, so that was kind of the ground of my work. And then, was lucky enough to do well in school and then develop this science of emotions and study emotions that have changed my life, like compassion, which really foundational emotion, and then awe. About 15 years ago, our lab, I have a terrific lab at Berkeley, lots of great PhD students. We got a couple of big research grants, and we just started studying awe around the world, and it's meant the world to me.
So can we get your definition of awe and why study? I'm interested in hearing about all the emotions that have impacted you and what you've studied, but particularly awe. Like, how would you define it, and why did you study and write it?
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually a hard question in some of our best minds. In fact, if you look at all the spiritual traditions, from Hinduism to mystical Christianity to Taoism, they grapple with what is this, transcendence that we feel? And then some of the great philosophers of the 18th century and on, Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and then Ralph Waldo Emerson and others have been like, what is this state that I experience when I'm just blown away and leaving worldly concerns? And that's all. And so kind of grounded in those philosophers, Jonathan Haidt and I, who's a longtime collaborator, defined awe as this feeling. So it's an emotion, like you said, Scott. When you encounter things that are beyond your frame of reference or vast, most typically it's like John said, the Grand Canyon, big sky, huge people, big ideas, and then it's mysterious. You can't make sense of it, and that's key, right? And you see something, and I love finding everyday awe. And I always walk by these redwood trees in this stream on my way to work. And, every time I look at the bark of the redwood tree and its size, I'm like, man, this thing is 500 years old. Like, what's that like? So it's mysterious. So when we feel vast and when we encounter things that are vast and mysterious, and then it triggers, tears and goosebumps and a sense of humility and sense of being quiet, a lot of fascinating responses.
And when you read your book, you get this state change. I noticed when I was reading it, because you are clearly in this more than just a scientist. You are inhabiting the experience and the emotion of this as you explore it. And you start with this concept of moral beauty. We're most likely to feel awe when we're moved by moral beauty. Can we look at that for a moment and just unpack it?
Yeah, and thank you for noting the approach to writing, John. There's a lot of great awe-based writing across human history that I profile. There's nature writing, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Wordsworth and his Prelude, and it's just part of our intellectual, spiritual stuff. The spiritual experiences. So I wanted to kind of move beyond my usual reliance on science and rely on narratives and stories and personal experiences. Moral beauty. There were many surprises in this science that I report upon, and one of them, in fact, in some sense, the most striking one to me is moral beauty. We gathered stories of awe from 26 countries around the world. India, China, UK, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, US, just all these different countries. We just said, hey, tell us a story of when you encountered something vast and mysterious, awe. And moral beauty was the most common story. And I hadn't expected that. In the West, we tend to think about nature as a primary source of awe, which is true. In a lot of countries, I thought it would be religious experience and spiritual practice, but it was this moral beauty. It's when you are moved and inspired and even transformed by someone's kindness, their courage, how they overcome hardship in life, and the stories we got were mind blowing. One of my favorites was, I think it was from Australia, and this son was writing about his 92-year-old dad, and the dad had every hardship. His parents died young. He was raised in poverty. His wife died young. He had all these kids. He spent his 90 years just working to support his kids. And the son was like, wow, what a figure. And so moral beauty is this, when you ask what makes you happy, right? We often think like, oh, I got to fix the patterns of my mind, or I got to meditate, or I got to go to Greece, I got to go to the Himalayas, like I was, and, find mysticism. And in fact, very often it's the people around us, I remember giving a talk about awe in London, and this guy, he literally stood up and he started crying. He's like, man, I was on my way to this talk, and I made eye contact with this stranger on the tube in London, and we just recognized like we're human beings, living life. And they just were struck by that. And so that's moral beauty. It's really recognizing our humanity and the goodness of other people.
And as an emotion scientist, how, what, because the word awe is so tied up in lots of different meanings. What's the cluster of emotions that we experience around this? I mean, what are the other kind of things that we're experiencing when we're experiencing awe? What is it doing to us?
Yeah, John, that's such an important question, and it's a hard one, right? All right, awe, the older definition of it etymologically is it's a fear and reverence and dread and horror. It's got a lot of stuff mixed up in there. Old scholars have worked really hard to think about the beautiful and the sublime. How is awe, sublime, different from, oh, those are beautiful flowers on a rolling hill? And, if your listeners are really interested in this, they should consult this work I did with Alan Cowan, who is what we call a computational emotion scientist. He uses the new kinds of statistics. And what we did is we would show people thousands of videos and have them tell us how they felt. We would have them look at thousands of vocalizations of emotion. Woo! Ah! And again, rate what the meaning was. And then with really cool statistics, and if you go to allencowan.com, you'll see the maps of these clusters. If you like to use your language, we can see that awe is really different. It's different from beauty. It's different from fear and terror. It is different from admiration and love. It's its own state. And that's important in our field, because then we start to think about, why do we feel awe? What does it do for us that's unique? And so we did a lot of work to really differentiate it from closed states.
Did you find that it was easy for all kinds of people everywhere to experience awe? I know for some people it's more challenging to access and understand the sort of more granular emotions we experience. But is that awe being such a more sort of all-consuming emotion? I'm just curious, does everybody have equal access to it? Do they report on it similarly?
Yeah. I approach things from an evolutionary perspective, and evolution always means individual variation, right? Mm-hmm. Because of our genetics and our family history and our culture and so forth. And when we look, we've studied on, tens of thousands of people or thousands of people, and there's really significant variation. A lot of us feel awe, for example, a couple times a week. That's what we find. And I write a lot about everyday awe and how to cultivate it in the book. But there are people who feel a lot of awe all the time. And, they're feeling awe 10 times a day. And they are hard to live with. They don't do the dishes. And they've always got some new petition for you to sign. And, they're kind of crazy. And, I have a little bit of that in my family. And then there are people who, it's interesting to think about people who don't feel a lot of awe. And now I worry about that. This emotion is so good for us. It gives us such meaning. And it's so easy to experience, ironically enough, despite its vastness. There's always individual differences. And the people who feel a lot of awe tend to be really open. They're just they're curious. They're open to other people. They're open to new ideas. They don't mind uncertainty that much, right? And then the people who don't feel too much awe, they like sort of things to be really fixed and certain and so forth. So we're learning something about those individual differences.
Dacher, what do you think the evolutionary purpose of awe is? What's it solving for?
Yeah, and we did a lot of different studies, just sort of looking at what does awe do to us socially, right? And what we find, and it's so interesting, John, when people feel a moment of awe, like when you had your forest bathing experience, often they'll their mind will be reset, and they'll come out of it and they'll say I just want to do some good for other people. And that is the first evolutionary purpose, which is it makes us integrate into social community, right? And become more collective. And you know, as E.O. Wilson and other people have written, that's fundamental to human evolution, is as we shift from our primate relatives to hominids, we just become really social and we do everything collectively. And awe enables that. It helps us cooperate. We share more, feeling awe. We have a different sense of self. We're like, wow, I have these collective dimensions to myself. I'm a Berkeley person, or I'm progressive, or I come from this class background. So really makes us do things that strengthen social collectives. And then the second thing that awe helps us, I think evolutionarily, and this is more subtle, and I end the book thinking about this, is it helps us see the systems around us. Systems thinking is so fundamental. Some people think it's one of the great achievements of the human mind. And what it means for humans in an evolutionary context is like, oh, you understand the social network you're part of better. So you know how to navigate dynamics. You look around at nature and you start to see the ecosystem, right? And where there are resources. That would be good evolutionarily. You suddenly are more aware of weather systems and patterns. And so I think awe helps us at that cognitive level too.
Building on that a little bit, we're really interested on the show in talking about how oftentimes our emotions are signaling to us about a need that is or isn't getting met. So I'm curious, and I think you've touched on this already in your last comments, but is awe like an affirmation of a need in us, or what's it signaling?
That's a really timely and deep question, Scott. I've raised two daughters who are in their mid-20s. We have, I teach young people, and I am struck by, they have a need for awe. They work so hard. There's so much stress right now in our culture, climate crisis, economic issues, polarization, authoritarianism, and young people, such a vital age to satisfy that need. And I just see them like not quite, being free and exploring and wandering and having wonder about the world. And I think in some sense, the need for awe is experienced in your hunger for wonder. Just like, I want to think about and be curious about and experiment with the groups that will define my community. And that's part of what awe does, that need to belong to collectives. And so that's why, for example, music is so profound as a source of awe, because we go to concerts, we love particular kinds of music, and you start to find your collectives, right? This is my culture. These are my people. And then I think awe speaks to the need to understand our lives, to put the scenes of our lives, the chapters into this big story, that we call, this is my life story. And, here's the system that the moments in my life are part of. When people are awe deprived, as for example, kids are in many contexts in the world, it's speaking to a need that's not satisfied, that we need to really be thinking about. And I like your language of, that's a bold statement. We have this need for the transcendence, right? For transcendence. And I think that's true.
And you talk about how wealth is undermining our ability to experience everyday awe. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, philosophically, there's this long-standing tension, between the material life and the transcendent life, if you will. Awe is a transcendent emotion. It just gets us beyond ourselves. As Jane Goodall said, it connects us to things that are larger than the self and outside of the self, right? Nature and culture and spirituality and so forth. And there's this deep human existential tension of, I got to be a material person and eat and, have a place and shelter and status. but I also have spiritual leanings and transcendent leanings. I want to lose the self. And, a lot ancient spiritual traditions, later discussions of the sacred and the profane have really differentiated those two things. And what that tells us is the material world of money and transactionalism and status striving, and all of that may be an antagonist of awe. And in fact, that's what we find empirically, that, the people who have more wealth struggle a little bit more to feel awe. When people have a more material orientation in life, they tend to feel less awe. And we have seen historically a rise in materialism worldwide. And so again, if we want a balance of awe in our lives, I think we need to be questioning materialism in some way.
It's super interesting. Talk to us about collective effervescence. You mentioned a concert going a moment ago, but you also say in your book that we've lost occasions for collective awe. Yeah,
man. Thank you for asking about that. I love collective effervescence. So collective effervescence, it's Emile Durkheim, great French sociologist. And he's like, man, he felt from his field work in different parts of the world that like the core to religion was moving in unison with other people. And you start to get emotional and tear up and get goosebumps and raise your arms in the air and, feel it. And it's electric, right? I see you smiling, Scott. I bet you've had a lot of these experiences.
I've been there.
Tell me one. What's an experience of collective effervescence for you?
No, I mean, whether it's be at a concert of my favorite band, in my youth, I was in part of sort of some religious experiences where the whole room was very much in that sort of collective effervescent space.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing process, and humans do it just instinctively. We're always kind of moving in unison, and suddenly we feel awe. And so that's hard to study scientifically, but I'll give you a couple of examples. But first, so from our stories that we gather around the world, 2,600 stories, we started to find these cool stories of collective effervescence, like concert going, an obvious one. So people, they go to a concert, it's Taylor Swift now, or for me, it's Iggy Pop. I'm wearing one of my Iggy Pop t-shirts.
Nice.
There he is. And, and suddenly you're like vibrating and hugging people and, proposing you buy a camper van and you go driving around the country and, it just immediately forms this community through collective effervescence. One of the beauties of studying collective effervescence is it got our lab closer to things that scientists often don't study, like religious ritual. So religious people, you start doing, different rituals that are part of your tradition, and you feel this collective effervescence. One of my favorites is sports. We got a lot of stories of British people at their favorite football team. Yeah, I see John.
Especially during playoffs.
Yeah. And they were like,
I don't have a lot of collective effervescence with QPR, unfortunately.
Who's your team?
QPR, Queen's Park Rangers. Yeah. The other teams have a lot of collective effervescence against us, but
and then there's the other side to this. I'm sorry to bring it up, but so yeah, it's this incredible emotion, and that's a hard thing to study scientifically. You got 200 people, you're measuring them, but we are learning, for example, dancing together brings you awe, and has a lot of benefits. There are studies of mosh pits. And you find that people kind of start moving in unison in the mosh pit and start to feel like they're part of a community. So Scott, to your question, I mean, everybody's worried about technology right now. I don't think the smartphone is a great source of awe. I don't think the laptop is a great source of awe. It has to be direct, right? But one of the things that technology has done that we don't realize as much or think about is it's knocked out a lot of collective effervescence, right? When I was in college, 1980, You would go to the record store, you'd buy an album, right? The latest, Talking Heads or Ted Nugent or whatever it is, and you'd get your friends together and you'd all listen to it together, right? Now, put on your headphones and you're in your solitary world. So I worry about our loss of this. But it's really cool. Young people, it's this need again, like you said, Scott, like they're playing more games together. There's more communal living now. There's more dancing together, dance societies and the like. So bring it back.
Yeah.
And on that theme, you talk a lot about the self-knowledge that all brings us, being when you feel part of something bigger than yourself, it gives you context. And given the impulse over however long it's been, but since the Second World War, since it's been measured, this impulse towards individualism in the last 50 years, what does self-knowledge from awe help us with? What does it give us?
Yeah, your question, thank you, John. It literally just gave me goosebumps because you're one of the first to ask the historical question in that way. And thinking about all, it's pretty clear that we've had 50, 60, 70 years of individualism, and Yankelevich, this political scientist pollster, calls it self-expressive individualism. I express myself, I tell you my views, and I define my identity in unique ways. I'm skeptical of conventions and categories and so forth. And there is enormous good that has come out of that, and this is really in the spirit of John Stuart Mill and, just the importance of individual dignity, individual rights, women's rights of people of color, etc., sexual identities. So there's a lot of good news, At the same time, we have lost certain things. We've lost community, bowling alone, Robert Putnam. We've lost a sense of shared humanity. You look at the polarization issues in the United States and elsewhere, just like no sense of shared humanity, even though it exists. We've lost collective effervescence in doing things together. And so we've lost a lot. And I think one of the reasons this emotion, awe, has hit such a chord or struck such a chord for people is it brings them to that, that, I like singing together with people. I like eating together with people. I like the rituals that we lost. 90% of Americans were religious 40 years ago. Now it's 55, 60%. I miss those rituals. And we got to recreate. And then the bigger shared narrative of life of, what does it mean to be living in the 21st century? What's the story we tell about our shared identities? And so I think awe gets you to that. It really surfaces. And I'll say also, we were talking about this before, our relationship to nature, nature is the second fundamental source of awe after moral beauty. And it's a different kind of relationality. My collaborator, Dr. Uriah Salidman, indigenous, calls it ecological belonging. Got a book out on this coming up. It's the sense that I am nature. I am part of this ecosystem, and we have to return to that. So awe is an important gateway to social change right now for the historical reasons you talk about, which is, I'm glad you bring it up.
In what ways do our brains work against us in this? You mentioned people having, when they're more open to uncertainty, they have greater experiences. But I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about conversations we've had on the show and our own research that John and I have done, and in the space of our predicting brains are constantly working to minimize surprise. So in the endeavor of our brain trying to minimize surprise, how does that muffle our experience of that openness to awe and wonder?
Yeah, and I think that prediction is one operation of the mind, and obviously there are many others. And I write about what I call the default self, which is a lot of consciousness. It's like trying to predict what people do, predict what will gain you status, advance the self, which is, of course, important for every imaginable reason. But we are also, and this really, in some sense, sets us apart as a species. We are explorers and we are questioners and wanderers. Their dopamine, this neurotransmitter, helps us explore the new, go into mystery where we don't have predictions, think about things that we don't know, right? And so I think that what awe is part of is a different way of understanding the world, of exploration and discovery, and thinking about all the unknowns that current knowledge can't make predictions for. And in fact, as I wrote awe, and you start to look at a lot of great innovators, and that's the story of their life, is they go after mystery. Charles Darwin, like, why did we evolve? One of my favorite examples is Newton and Descartes were blown away by rainbows. They're like, I don't understand. I have no prediction about why a rainbow would occur. What is that? And they did a lot of scientific work. And then you look at social innovators, and, so yes, we're always seeking to minimize uncertainty with predictions, a very narrow analytical mind, but we also have a very deep capacity to explore the unknown. And it's why people innovate. It's why people create rock and roll and new paintings and new science.
Yeah.
Can we channel some of this thinking now into the implications on leadership? Because you've given us some really foundational thinking around the value of awe, the function of awe, the need it's meeting in us, the kind of opportunities to do more with it. Why do leaders need to foster this? What are they either missing by not doing it, or gaining from making awe a factor in their thinking?
Man, I mean, taking a step back, what we know scientifically now, and we've got a lot of good tests of this, with people in really stressful situations, is a minute or two of awe is about as good for you as anything you can do. It's good for your heart. It's good for your immune system. It's good for your stress. It's, we tested this, just published a paper, healthcare providers during COVID, finding a minute of awe a day, and they feel less depressed and anxious, I mean, and that's why the Surgeon General is very interested in this emotion. And I think we'll see a lot of it in organizational life and healthcare. I'm going to talk to healthcare leaders tomorrow about cultivating awe, which they're very interested in. I would say a few different reasons, John. And again, one of the cool things about the science, as I report on in the book, is it's pretty easy to find, just being outside and look. I just had my undergrads look at the sky for a minute. Whoa, that's awe-inspiring. Listen to a piece of music, etc. So why in the workplace? One is, wow, is this a good emotion for innovation? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not the scholar to do this, but I kept bumping into it, is really innovative people. Their innovation begins in awe, the Einsteins and Darwins and Rachel Carsons and Steve Jobs. And, and now there's new work on innovation and creativity in digital technologies coming out of moments of awe. Healthcare and medicinal discoveries coming out of like being awestruck by some possibility. So it's good for innovation. The second thing that I think is interesting is, people are now saying this is a meaning, purpose-driven generation or era, which I believe, being around a lot of young people, they're like, yeah, this is a cool job, but what's the purpose of this work, right? Mm-hmm. And awe gets you there. If you ask people, what, think in just think about the work you do and what are the things that really give you awe in all the different things you do at work. As they do that inquiry, they'll really get to like, God, I really love bringing people together to innovate. That's what makes me get goosebumps. And then that tells you something about where you find purpose in work. And then, for a lot of people in certain kinds of sectors, and this is a practice I'll do tomorrow with several hundred, people in healthcare, is like these stories of how your work colleagues inspire you, moral beauty, are powerful, right? Just to lift up the kind of the moral integrity of our work. And so it's a good emotion for the workplace. Certainly kept me going all these years.
What else should we be asking you?
Well, the one of the things I felt a lot of worry about as I wrote this book, I think everyday awe, how to cultivate it, I think is a good one. I think you said this earlier, Scott. We have these conceptions of awe, of like going to the Grand Canyon and having the privilege to do forest bathing or sailing in Greece. And our work started to find that awe is around us, in our everyday lives. And I called that everyday awe. Einstein felt it was this state of consciousness. It was just a basic mental state, like compassion or a sense of justice or a sense of anxiety or threat. And I agree, and the science aligns with that. And what that really has inspired is in work in different parts of the world. It's like, man, you can find this pretty easily, And so if you have a practice, a contemplative practice in life, this is an opportunity for us just to take a minute, pause, look around you, think about something that's vaster and mysterious, feel a little bit of awe, listen to a piece of music. Just go listen to a piece of music that really meant something to you when you're 20, and it'll sort of take you back to that moment. Think of somebody who's of moral beauty to you. I loved doing that. It's just I asked somebody recently this question, and she's like, oh my God, it was my 10th grade English teacher who taught me how to write. And then I actually was a pretty good writer, and I have it in me, and now I'm a writer, So I think this is a really easy emotion to bring back into our lives and meet that need that you guys talked about of like our need for awe.
Yeah.
I think this is so important to not put awe on a pedestal, and think that it has to be found by, being one of the first people to get a trip into outer space or, whatever it is.
Who has the coolest bunker, or,
Yeah, that's very depressing. Yeah.
I could not agree more, and I think there's something in our Western tradition, and we think of spirituality like that. Like in the West, it's like you go to this remote place and your mind is blown and you have nirvana, but really there's a lot of it all around us right now, and not to put it on a pedestal, as you said, it's important for us to remember.
What's next for you, Dacher, in terms of your research and the things that you're really excited about?
Thank you for asking that, John. One is, and this just grew out of the Awe book, which is when people learned of the Awe science, which is a new science, they realized like our work is about this, and we don't have enough of it. So in recreational communities and in healthcare communities, medical doctors, like they've lost their sense of awe. A lot of museums, and so I'm doing a lot of work to get awe back into organizational contexts, right? Just to remind people of awe if they visit a museum, tell stories of moral beauty in healthcare. Doing a lot of work with palliative care. As you head to the end of life, awe reflections are powerful. So that's been exciting. And then I'm just fascinated. You began our conversation with this of moral beauty. Like that's amazing to me. Not only is it amazing to me how kind we are, and yes, we're also violent and horrible, and we're a complex species, but we're kind. That's amazing, and I've studied that a lot. But then I'm equally blown away by, if I see someone be kind or courageous, I feel like a better person. And not only that, if you tell me a story of moral beauty, I feel inspired, right? So there's something magical about moral beauty that I want to sort of work on and get out into the world.
You've certainly inspired me. You've given me a dozen ideas here that of reframing things that and bringing more meaning to them, or a new meaning for them. So I mean, I really thank you for that. And your book is fantastic, and I really, both Scott and I loved it. And
thank you.
So glad that you were able to find time for us. I think
a pleasure.
This weekend, what would you encourage everybody to start doing this weekend to get a bit more awe into their lives? I mean, I know you've given us lots of ideas, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's all in the spirit of our conversation, John and Scott, and it's just the accessibility. I think one of you used that word of awe, not to put it on a pedestal, but to see where it is around you. And first of all, for our listeners, they should go to Greater Good in Action, ggia.berkeley.edu, lots of awe practices. But, for the past 10 years, and I do this with my students, I've developed lots of practices. I do this in my personal life. What I would encourage people to do this weekend is think about the 8 wonders of life that organize the book of nature, moral beauty, collective effervescence, music, visual things, ideas, and a couple of others. And then just, pause, put away the chatter of your mind to the best of your abilities, and take in the awe of one of those wonders. So what I will do is I'll spend a moment near some beautiful trees and just feel their vibrancy. I will definitely look at the sky for a minute or two. I will always listen to music and sort of sense the awe and wonder of the music, and just listen to music intentionally. I will go teach leaders and ask them to share stories of moral beauty from their work. And once they do, I will remember some of those stories for a very long time. I will probably, I'm lucky to have a job in the world of scholarship, so I'll think about an idea. Right now it's freedom. I'm reading about John Stuart Mill, and it's just like, man, the idea of freedom, it's amazing, So there's a lot of awe around us. And then, connect to people we care about and who we collaborate with. So it's easy to find. And those are some things I'll be doing. And if your listeners want to try some, go to ggia.berkeley.edu. It's free. There are lots of awe practices. They could do an awe walk. There's many different things to do. So I've given some hints.
Brilliant. Well, I'm certainly going to be looking at that right after the show and planning out some of those things for the weekend. I think, you absolutely embody your work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dacher, this conversation was good for my soul. So thank you.
Oh.
And thank you for the work you're doing in the world. It's needed. It's important. And folks, if you haven't gotten your copy, go online, go to Greater Good, and also get your copy of Awe today. And folks, until next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?